is Data Prepper 2.0. We've got Mr. Venable here to talk about that, and we've also got Dave Lago here to talk about our development backlog and triage meeting.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Otherwise, my face will be blown out to full screen proportions, and that's not going to help anyone. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're logging in. So just wanted to put in a quick plug for the backlog meeting that we're doing on Mondays for the security repos. As Nate was saying, this is something that we just recently started doing on Mondays, and I do recognize a couple of familiar names on the participant list today. So some of you already know that we're doing this. We haven't advertised it super broadly, as this is something that we're kind of like just starting to fill out to see if it's useful or not. But basically, we're doing our Monday meetings where we do backlog triaging, look at things that came over, see what's what, and try to either reply, ask more questions, or try to prioritize, see what we're going to be working on for the week. So if you want to just come hang out, participate, ask questions. Also very useful if some of those issues that came in during the week are filed by you, and you feel like maybe you want to just chime in and give us some more context or talk about them with us. Just join us. It's not a lot of structure in the meeting. It's pretty much just us just hanging out and talking about the backlog of those two repos. Again, this is, at least for now, just for the security repos, so both security backend and security into dashboards. I'm not sure at this point if we'll do this more broadly, but at least for now, this is more of an experiment. So come join us. In terms of how to join us, the same way that you found out about this meeting on Meetup, it's the same Meetup organization. So you'll see this meeting.
I think I will move on to Mr. Venable here to talk about Data Prepper 2.0.
Thanks, Nate. Hi,
yeah,
I'm David Venable. Hi, I'm David Venable, and I am a maintainer on the Data Prepper project, which is part of OpenSearch. I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, so Data Prepper is a pipeline for observability in OpenSearch. You can use Data Prepper to ingest logs, traces, or metrics into OpenSearch. And I wanted to talk about some of the changes in our recent 2.0 release. So the maintainers released Data Prepper 2.0 on October 10th. And actually just yesterday, we also released a patch release 2.0.1. And so we would encourage any user of Data Prepper to update to that version. Or if you're also interested in trying Data Prepper out, it's a great version to start with. Today, I'd like to discuss some of the major changes that we've made and we have in 2.0. So I'm going to make sure my slides work. Here we go. First, I want to talk about pipeline routes and some of the reasons for routing events. So some customers that we've talked to want to be able to route data to different clusters. Sometimes this is because the clusters store different data, or sometimes data may have different geographical requirements. Say, for example, you can have some data in one global region, but not another. Also, we sometimes want to route different logs or traces to different indices. So one of the examples I'm going to go with in this presentation is that I have, let's say we want to have one index that tracks logs that are related to info, and then logs that are related to warnings or errors, for example. And then another reason we want to be able to reroute data to different OpenSearch clusters might be related to filtering out data. So what Data Prepper does have the ability to filter data with a drop event processor, but we can also use this new routing feature to help as well. And then one of the other things we're really excited about is that now you can route to different sub-pipelines. So Data Prepper supports this concept where you can have one pipeline and then other pipelines that it connects to. And those allow us to start to filter events so that they go through different processor chains. And so, for example, if you want to mutate some events a little bit differently, you can send those events to a different sub-pipeline. and you'll have a different set of processors that can, say, alter the data a little bit differently for one specific event type than another before sending those to OpenSearch. Okay, so I want to just talk a little bit briefly about what Data Prepper 1.0 had in terms of multiple syncs. So this is the basic Data Prepper architecture. And here we're using Fluent Bit as an input. In 1.0, Data Prepper had the ability to send the same events to multiple syncs. So you could send them to multiple OpenSearch clusters, or perhaps we also had like a standard output so that you could kind of view what's happening with your cluster. And so Fluent Bit would send into Data Prepper, and that's where we see the source coming in. Then it goes into the buffer, and then this processor box here represents any number of processors that you want to perform mutations on. Prior to Data Prepper 2.0, all the events would go to any sync you defined. Now 2.0 has the ability to support routes. And so these routes can allow us to specify certain syncs that only receive some events. And so in this case, you can see we put a gate in front of this sync for, let's say, worn and above levels. And then we have another route for info. And then this third sync will send we'll send all events. And so I'll pull this up. This is a snippet from our pipeline configuration file. And what we added was a new concept called route, which you can see up here. A route is basically a name and a condition. And so here we have a route named worn and above, and it has a condition that says the log level is either equal to worn or it's equal to error. Data Prepper has an expression syntax that should be mostly familiar, and that's what we use here. And so this is a Data Prepper syntax within this expression. And next, what we'll do is we'll define on our sync a route. You can actually have one or more routes, but in this case, we're going to say this first sync has routes for worn and above. And so what this will do is Data Prepper will only send events to this sync that have the log level equal to worn or a log level equal to error. And so now we've started routing data to that sync. We can have multiple routes. And so here I'm showing the info route. And then again, there's a second sync that has routes defined for info. So only events that have an info log level will reach this one. And then finally, if we don't define any routes on a sync, all events are going to go there. And so you can send all events unconditionally to any sync in addition to conditionally routing some. All right, so we have some items on our roadmap that we think will be really exciting with this new route feature. So one, we want to start adding new syncs. In particular, we're looking at adding an S3 sync. This is on a roadmap for early 2023. And the idea here is that we can start to send perhaps all events to a lower cost storage, such as Amazon S3, and then maybe only some events you send into OpenSearch. We also have some ideas for new expressions in our syntax. And so if you have any operators that you feel you need that we don't yet have implemented, feel free to let us know via GitHub. We'd love to expand the syntax further and start to add new expressions to make these conditions more powerful. And then another concept that the maintainers are talking about are the idea of processor routes. So we do have some GitHub discussions on this, and we're still discussing whether or not to do it because you can, because of subpipelines, you can actually route to different processors already. But we're looking into the idea that perhaps if you have a chain of processors, you might be able to skip one processor specifically for certain conditions. And so we do have a GitHub issue on that, and we would love to get community feedback on the idea of possibly having processor routes using this same concept. And that's everything I was going to talk about with routes as one of the new features. Next, I want to talk about our core peer forwarder. Data Prepper 1.0 had a concept of peer forwarding for trace data, and it supported two of our trace plugins. It supported the service map stateful plugin and the trace group processor. And what these would do is this would route events with specific trace IDs always to the same node, so that we could keep some data in memory and enrich that data as it came through. So, for example, as all the spans for one trace would come through into Data Prepper, we could enrich it with an overall view of the trace once all the spans came through. And so after all the spans would come through, we'd have an overall view of the whole trace. And from that, we could enrich each span. In Data Prepper 1.3, we added a new aggregate processor. And this aggregate processor you can use for logs, and it can do things like combine logs or deduplicate. But it only worked for a single node because we didn't have any ability to reroute data between nodes. Data Prepper 2.0 adds a core peer forwarding feature that any plugin can use, and it allows for stateful aggregations. And now we can do stateful aggregations on logs as well as traces on multiple nodes. And so I want to talk a little bit about how this works. It's actually the same basic concept we did for traces. It's just been moved into Data Prepper Core as a core feature. So if you have a Data Prepper cluster with, let's say, 6 nodes, you would configure FluentBit to send to any of these nodes. You might use round robin. And so you might have something that looks like this, where FluentBit's sending to any arbitrary node within the cluster. Now, internally, Data Prepper creates a hash ring for its aggregations. And so let's say we have event objects that use a source IP for aggregation. This could also be the trace ID. That's what we do for traces. Any event with a certain source IP will want to land on a single node in the hash ring. And so here I kind of gave an example where we have source IPs of 10.20, 21, all the way through 25. And those hashes are just happening to end up in these different, on these different nodes. Well, let's say FluentBit has 2 events that have this value of source IP 10.22. FluentBit's going to send them to 2 arbitrary Data Prepper nodes. Let's say this one that's supposed to have the 10.20 and this one that's supposed to have the 10.21. And Data Prepper will hash those out, and it'll send those events to the correct node, and that node will then be assigned for processing the 10.22. And this way it has all the data it needs in memory for performing the aggregation. And so with this feature, we can now do stateful aggregations on our logs as well as traces. Right, next I want to talk about some changes to our directory structure. So if you've been using Data Prepper on 1.0, you would normally run it by running a jar file. And so what we did was we created a new directory structure, and this has a bin/Data Prepper command. It's really just a script that runs the jar files. And one of the things we were doing here is we were trying to make Data Prepper's structure look a little bit more like OpenSearch and follow some of the conventions that had as well. And so now there's a single script to run Data Prepper, and it doesn't require any arguments. We also have a config directory, and now the Data Prepper config file sits directly in that directory, and you don't have to specify the path anymore. We also have our log4j configuration there. And one of the things that this allowed us to do was to create a pipelines directory. And so in Data Prepper 1, you could have multiple pipelines, and they may actually be completely parallel to each other and have nothing, they might not even be connected to each other, or they could be connected, but maybe they have no direct relationship. But you had to put those all in one large file, and that could become somewhat onerous to maintain. And so now you can split your Data Prepper pipelines into different files, and really any YAML file in this pipelines directory will be parsed as a pipeline. We also have lib directories. We don't need to talk about that too much, but what all of this does is it really simplifies the ability to run Data Prepper. Now you don't need any arguments, and you can run Data Prepper as a single command, and also provide multiple files instead of just having one large file. One of the other things that we did in Data Prepper 2.0 was add support for JSON and CSV. And so we added a few new processors. One, we have a parse JSON processor. You can use this to parse JSON within any configured field that you have. And so if your events, let's say, for example, your log files have some sort of JSON that was written out in them, you can now parse that JSON and create individual fields from that rather than just have a single string. You can also use this with our S3 source. So the S3 source can now support JSON ND if you use the new line codec and then parse the resulting lines as JSON files. And so this was something that a number of people have been asking about, is the ability to load JSON ND files. And so now with this processor, you can get that. Similarly, we added a new processor for parsing CSV files. This will parse them from independent events. And along those lines, we also added a new S3 source codec. So we had some customers that wanted to load CSV files from S3, and now they can actually use a codec directly. And every row or every line will create one event that goes into Data Prepper, and it'll be split based off the CSV parameters you provide. And finally, I want to talk about some of our updates to JDK versions. To start, JDK 11 is now the minimum. We chose this version for a couple of reasons. One, it includes some new changes for modules, and we're interested in using them in some of our upcoming plugin enhancements. It also matches OpenSearch. Now, this isn't something we need to retain because Data Prepper and OpenSearch are distinct products. But since we were interested in using modules, this was just another reason to update to JDK 11. And Data Prepper also has an archive file which includes a JDK, and now it's bundled with JDK 17. We did some performance tests and found that JDK 17 had the best performance between, this was when we supported 8, and it had the best between 17, 11, and 8. And so we made this the default version. And similarly, our Docker image includes JDK 17 as well. Now, there is a no JDK option, and so you can download Data Prepper without the JDK and, say, run it on 11 if you so wish. And with that, those are all the major changes we made. We have a lot of other features, and so here I included some links. We have a link to our release notes. You can check out all the features as well as some of the breaking changes. We did try to reduce the number of breaking changes, but there were a few we made. We don't think it should be too hard of a migration. And again, we do encourage people to update to Data Prepper 2. I also have some links to our documentation and to our roadmap. So I mentioned we have some upcoming features that we're looking at, such as the S3 sync. And so I'd be happy to, love for everyone to take a look at the roadmap and give feedback on what we have upcoming. That's it for me. Now, I am going to be able to stay around if anyone has any questions, and happy to discuss if we don't have anything else on the agenda. Thanks.
Thanks for that, David. I think we might have had a couple of questions in the chat for you. I know that Ryan Paras, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it properly. Is there anything out there by the way of performance numbers of Data Prepper versus something like Logstash? And then also, are there any plans for optimized inputs to minimize performance impact of marshalling/unmarshalling?
Yeah, we do have some performance numbers. I don't think we ran them on 2.0 actually, but in our repository there should be some information from our latest runs, which I think we're on 1.4 perhaps. 1.5 didn't really add anything to core core functionality. It added the S3 source, and so I don't think we reran it there, but we should probably rerun it for 2.0 and update that page. And then regarding marshaling, unmarshaling, I'm not exactly sure what the question is there. Would you be able to elaborate on that, Ryan?
Sure. So default inputs, so like, for example, you guys use example fluent bit into as an input, then into data prepper. I believe when looking at this previously, I think you guys usually had mentioned, I think it was using like new line delimited JSON as input. I didn't know if are we looking at other plans for maybe more optimized codecs, things like I can't remember what Fluent typically uses under the hood. To kind of help the penalties of dealing with passing JSON all over the place?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think we haven't done anything on that at this point. But if I think that would be something we could consider to add. So this would be a different output from FluentBit rather than just using the FluentBit JSON.
Yeah. So normally, like if you do like FluentBit to FluentD or FluentD to FluentD for that matter, they usually use, I think it's message pack. Now I'm thinking about it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I know that has optimizations for like marshaling, unmarshaling for as compared to JSON, for example. At least if you're using the right libraries. You know, other types of kind of, I'll call stream programs, kind of like what you guys are writing here. Sometimes they write their own kind of binary or customized methodology as well. I just didn't know if you had anything like that to helps, again, performance numbers, especially upon input. JSON marshaling or non-marshaling can get very expensive at scale.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we do have an open issue for supporting message pack. We haven't implemented that yet, but I do think that would be something worthwhile.
All right, cool.
I'm a little curious myself about Nate Boot here. Sorry. I'm a little curious about the parsing of JSON and CSV, because I know sometimes there's options that can go along when you're creating your indices to make them dynamic, you know, where they can add fields on the fly. You know, will it take any of that into account, or will it just try and let the engine report an error?
I think what it will do if you add new indices, I'd have to double check on this, but I believe what we're doing is we're just adding arbitrary values after that, so that you might get something like column 1, column 2. But I'll have to double check on that one. I can't remember what we ended up on that with that change.
Gotcha. Yeah, just curious, because I know, you know, even in the CSV use case, that, you know, sometimes people have the first row as like column headers, and sometimes though can be useful as using them as field names in some of the projects I've seen.
Okay, yeah. So the CSV codec does support the ability to, so the CSV codec that we added in the S3 source will read that first line. I think you can configure whether that is going to be a header or not. And if it is there, that you can use that and it'll define the names of all the columns underneath it.
Cool. And so it feels kind of weird to me defining a configuration file entry for a static CSV or JSON file that's never going to change or anything like that. Is it more of a tail kind of thing, or does it just kind of take the CSV as it is or the JSON as it is and never look at it again?
I'm not. Could you maybe rephrase your question? I'm not exactly sure.
Sure. Well, I get. Let me think of a use case here. Like, let's say I get like monthly exports of JSON that go into a certain file. You know, that they all go into the same file name on disk. Will it notice that the file has changed, as in, like, will it be watching for changes to the CSV files and JSON files on disk?
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me address that a little bit. So the maintainers definitely envision Data Prepper more as a last mile ingestion service. And so Data Prepper does have a file source that's really mostly for testing. It isn't really a main use case that we have. And so for this, the CSV is actually coming from S3. So this is part of our S3 source. And the way that works is as you create new as you create new objects in S3, you should also configure your bucket to send notifications to an SQS queue. And Data Prepper will subscribe to that SQS queue. And so as you write new events into S3, as you write new objects into S3, they create notifications in SQS. Data Prepper reads those. And that's the way Data Prepper detects whether to reread or read a CSV file.
Oh, I see. Okay, that clears that up for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Looks like Mehul has a
Hey.
question about. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, great work. And it looks like, you're going from a single node instance to a distributed system, which is, so desperately needed in this last mile space. My question is, how much more ETL functionality do you plan to push into Data Prepper? You're already starting to do aggregations there. How sophisticated do you think it'll get, and will you support or do you already support a pretty rich programming model there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I'd love to see how the community, or what interest there is in the community, from the community in this developing. Right now, we're very much viewing Data Prepper as an ingestion tool for observability use cases. And so we've been focused mostly on logs, traces, and metrics. I do know I've talked to several people about perhaps getting receiving data from other databases, for example. So perhaps receiving from a SQL database and then using that to push data out. And so right now, I think probably all the functionality we're looking at, though, is focused on trying to help anyone who has observability data that they want to push into OpenSearch. Or we also have some interest in pushing metrics data out to Prometheus, and then also to places like S3 as well. But if there is more interest in developing that out further into more and more use cases, I'm definitely open to community contributions in that regard.
Thank you.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions here? Let me scroll back and make sure we're not leaving anyone out. So Mr. Fridane, you mentioned we were having problems with our site. Did that get finished? It looks like you made a comment saying that Data Prepper is ready for download now.
It is now resolved, and Data Prepper 2.01 is live on the website.
Awesome. Everyone, stop what you're doing. Go there right now and go play with Data Prepper 2.0.
Thank you.
Even if it's just to break it, we owe it to our fellows here.
It's always good to break it, then we can fix it.
But to me, that's how I have fun and learn things at the same time. Like,
Yeah.
It's like getting a new set of Legos. Sometimes you have to bend the pieces a little bit and all of that, getting familiar with it. So I believe we have no further topics on the agenda. So I think we can move on to just kind of an open QA time. So this is where anyone can ask questions about anything. If someone has an interesting thought they'd like to share about OpenSearch or saw something curious on the interwebs, I hope everyone saw the tweet that we went out. And as it turns out, there was a case study done for From Software. If you're a gamer, From Software is the company behind Elden Ring. And as it turns out, in their infrastructure, they use the OpenSearch managed service. And there was this case study that went out demonstrating that they, handled 1.5 million concurrent connections. And there was a little piece about OpenSearch in their I believe they used it for testing a huge amount of log files. So it's a really interesting case study, and it's I feel particularly proud to be part of the gaming community in that way, even if it's not making games, but still that's like, an interesting side that we get to be part of that accomplishment.
I just wanted to say I'm just glad to see all the progress that's going on, both in the, in the software and the community. I'm curious, I guess, if I want to throw something out there, I'm curious to what extent, we in the community would like to invest in sort of the SQL ecosystem around OpenSearch, and whether there's interest in it. Certainly, I saw an announcement recently from the competitor Elasticsearch, and they finally put some SQL support up there. Of course, with a lot of fanfare, though I don't think it's any better, or in fact, it might be worse than what you can find in Open. Just thoughts about that during that there.
I personally think it's a great bridge between people with classic relational database experience moving to OpenSearch. We kind of that whole SQL plugin there provides a great way for people to get in and learn. So I don't have too many strong feelings about ways to improve it, but I see it as a very useful and a core component to get people interested in using it. So I'm all about it. So I'm curious, anyone in here, when you're querying your indices, do you usually start with an SQL query, or do you just go right to the Lucene syntax, or
I'm just wondering how we think it ought to be used. Is it something that's used as sort of a standalone SQL instance, or do we expect it to be used as part of sort of a federated query system like Athena or Trino, or do we expect it to be? I'm just curious as to, because we all know that full text search is an important component of analytics. And SQL helps kind of bring this back into the analytics ecosystem. So besides just users coming in and being able to use the system, are there use cases there? And what are the use cases that people are pushing on here? All right, looks like there's no dice on this one.
Yeah, I'm getting crickets as well.
All right, that's all I got. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for bringing your question to the public. That's how we find things out. Looks like Ralph here. Would you like to ask your question to the crowd, Ralph, or I can read it for you, whatever makes you the most comfortable?
Hey guys, no, I can ask it. So I'm Ralph. I'm from Avalok. So we
Welcome.
have, we have so far not really joined these meetings here, usually due to time issues. Now we try to make an effort and actually join. Thanks a lot also actually for putting it on a time slot where we can join from Europe. Makes it very good for us. I posted a question in the forum quite a long time ago, actually, about our admittedly maybe rather special setup, because we're not just doing like DevOps where we just take OpenSearch, deploy it and run it on our own and just have one cluster running, because that would be way too easy. So we have many clusters running at many customers in many different setups. And since you mentioned SQL before, anybody using SQL might be familiar with something like Liquibase, which is a tool which you can use to manage schemas. So on RDBMS, you can just go and say, oh, now I want to change something in this table. And then you write that update script and you register that with Liquibase, and it basically takes care of that for you. So you can just take your application, deploy it at the customer side or basically anywhere, and it automatically checks which updates are outstanding, runs those, and then you have the defined schema in the exact setup which you want. We looked around and we did not really find something like that for Elasticsearch or OpenSearch. Which makes it a bit hard for us to actually manage the setup because, as I said, we have many different clusters running for the same software as well. So whenever we basically want to deploy a new version of our software which interacts with OpenSearch, we need some way to transform the indices and anything else which is set up in the cluster, including settings, for example, to match the newest state. And it would be very cool if something like that already exists and people could just point us in the right direction. Or if that doesn't exist, if somebody could tell us how they handle it, if they're in a similar situation, or if this is something which is completely missing so far and it would need a community effort where we would need to build something like that. And probably this meeting now is too short term because I didn't announce the topic up front, but it would be cool if maybe we can have that discussion in the forum or as a dedicated slot in a future meeting.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds like you're talking a little bit about automating the configuration tasks and various other system configurations so as to be runnable without a human present.
Exactly. That's actually a very important part. Yes, it must be possible for us to deploy our applications with zero human interaction. Okay, I mean, somebody clicks the start button, but
Sure.
beyond that,
Well,
no interaction.
You may want to look into the Helm operator and or using Kubernetes. Are these things that you've considered? Have you?
We're running on Kubernetes, so the technical aspects of just pushing out a new version, all of that is handled. We looked into the operator from Opster. We have not yet started using it because they don't support all the features we need and we hadn't had time to contribute those. So for now, we're just using stateful sets on Kubernetes and a lot of scripting around that. It's really more about actually managing the indices, for example, and we don't manage those when we push out OpenSearch as a release. We manage those when we push out the application which uses OpenSearch. And so it could even be, I mean, if you do A/B deployments and stuff like that, it could even be that two different versions are running. So we also need to be able to manage that, although we say they should be backwards compatible. So if the new one starts, does a migration, the old one should still be able to interact with that. That's then more on the actual design of the migration. The question is mainly about tooling around that.
Gotcha. Well, and I wish I had a more direct answer for you. In the past, when I've had to deal with somewhat non-standard things like that, I usually land on Ansible or Puppet. I don't know how well those play with OpenSearch. It's not something I've looked into, but there's lots of ways that you can deploy your infrastructure as code, and that sounds like it might be a solution that at least might, if nothing else, would be a good lead for you to look into. Andy Wick, did you have a response?
Yeah, I can
question?
share what I do.
Sure.
So it depends how locked down you need your indices to be, but basically what I do is I write per indice, or it could be global, into the meta of that indice, kind of what the version is, like a number. And then when my app starts up, it can query that number and figure out if it needs to auto upgrade that indice or not. And then if you need to lock it down, then you use the static, attribute on your objects, so that users or apps can't accidentally create new fields. Is if it's okay if they create new fields, then you don't need to do that. And then you just update the mapping every time the app starts if that number is wrong, and then you just update that number after you've updated the mapping. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's actually a cool thing. Thanks a lot. But that does mean that your application needs to be able to basically handle any version upgrade from any previous version, right?
Yeah, and what we do is we say on certain majors that you had to be on the previous major, right? And so that helps lower that. So, going from 1 to 2 is fine, but going from 1 to 3 is not fine. You had to stop somewhere along on 2.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
Interesting. It sounds like version control for indices.
Yes, I mean, this is
Exactly.
essentially what we're looking for. So this is also what I mentioned, Liquidbase, it's what they are doing. This is version control for database schemas.
Oh, we should, Ralph, let's file a feature request for you, because this might be useful to more than just you. And it's, Andy Wick here seems to have coded a solution to the same problem you're having. Let's file a feature request. It can't be just you two who want to use something like this.
Okay, can do that. Yeah, I presume others will have need for the same, but I was a bit discouraged by not getting any answer since March.
Gotcha.
Maybe I just posted in the wrong part of the forum. I guess nobody reads DevOps.
Well, and we're increasing our efforts to be more responsive on the forum. I humbly encourage you to tag me or Chris or David Tippett. We don't always know the answers, but we know the people who do. So we're always happy to help track someone down if we can't find the answer. So I do apologize you had a poor experience there.
I think it
No
also
worries.
relates to who owns the index mapping. Elastic in the past has been very each customer can do whatever they want, and it's only recently that they've kind of said, oh, here's standard ways to do things, and so it's people are only kind of hitting this issue is if they have a app that requires a certain layout, and then each app seems to do it differently.
Awesome. So if you, Ralph's forum thread is in the chat. If anyone else who's not comfortable contributing here wants to go have a look, it's in the chat there, and it looks like. So does that at least get you going in the right direction, Ralph? I was hoping to leave some time for some other questions that are popping up in chat.
Yes, it does, and I will raise that feature request. I guess in the OpenSearch repository or in the meta repository.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, it'd be part of the OpenSearch repo.
Good, I'll do that. Thanks.
Excellent. So Atita, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Would you like to come online and ask your question?
Hi, sure. Yeah, I think I pretty much wrote what I wanted to ask because I think hybrid search is kind of a hot topic. Just wanted to know if OpenSearch is also considering to go in that direction as well, or the efforts have already been started. It's just that probably I don't know.
Yeah, I may not know the answer to that question. What I can offer you is that someone did do a good presentation at OpenSearchCon regarding that. And I know that the videos will be available pretty soon. But I don't think I personally have anything to offer you there. Is anyone else using BM25 plus vector or any kind of hybrid search model? Oh, interesting. Well, Hannah, I believe it was was it Nick Nyes who gave the talk about? I will look it up for you to find out who gave that talk and make sure you get that video. But I think since we're not getting great answers here right now, I would suggest that you file a forum topic, just asking, for general feedback about where we're headed.
Sure.
And if
Wonderful.
you'd like, I'm happy to tap a core project member and have them kind of talk about their opinion on that.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for asking your question and thanks for joining. You said it was your first time here?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you. Many thanks for joining. And one more from Ryan here with a forum thread and a GitHub thread. Ryan, do you want to join in?
Yeah, I was, excuse me, I was just throwing out that there's a feature that came out in 2.0 for like document level monitoring. And I was just wondering if anybody had kind of used that at scale. We're trying to start some conversations on how to deploy a pretty large amount of document level monitors. And I was wondering if anybody had some either kind of examples of how they did it at scale with mind and kind of dealing with performance and not bogging down things while we index.
Well, my Jedi senses are hearing crickets again. This one might actually let's elevate your thread in the forum here and see if we can get people looking in there. Is there anyone from our engineering team on the call that might be able to address any of these? Let me go to participants here. Nothing, huh? Okay. Well, let's make sure that you have an outlet for your question, Ryan, and we'll get some input for you.
Cool, thank you.
You bet. Sorry, I don't have a immediate response for you.
No worries.
So I think we are running towards the end of the meeting here. If no one has any other immediate questions, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to set the slide on see you next time. I'm going to hang out till a little bit after the hour. If anyone wants to talk about non-OpenSearch related things or any more questions or just random observations, I'll have you all know.
I'll join you with a quick, as I'm looking into a little bit of what happened during this meeting with this questions that with the audience here, maybe we don't have an immediate answer. I'm wondering if we can, of course, point people to the forums and get traction there. But if there's anything else that we can do to make sure that those get, because as we were seeing the past two questions, in my head, there were names of a couple of people who I would just personally just go and ask, like, hey, Annie, what do you think about this thing? So maybe if, and I don't know, maybe we're doing this, but if we can maybe proactively just take notes of these questions and just try to connect these people back with the answers. This meeting may work for some people, and I'm glad that our European friends are able to join us, but some of the people, it may be like in the Pacific time zone or even in India, may not be as convenient, and they may be able to help more asynchronously. So that's just one thought. And then the other one is the getting people to maybe tag team in getting solutions for, I know that Ralph was bringing up the liquid-based equivalent for OpenSearch and some of other ideas. People sometimes they file them as issues in GitHub and feature requests. I'm wondering if there will be a venue, a forum where we can connect people who have similar interests, so maybe they can tag team and just send PRs around, like work together on those features or staff them to make them a reality. Because like Ralph said, like I doubt that they're the only ones who want to do this, but sometimes connecting those dots either in the forums or through a GitHub issue may be a little challenging. I'm wondering if there's something that we can do to more proactively highlight those opportunities. Like we do, and sometimes we just tag things on GitHub saying like help wanted or Hacktoberfest. So like there's some clever use of tags that help surface some of this collaboration opportunities. So just something to think about if there's anything that we can do there to make those connections and make things happen. It'll benefit all of us, because then hopefully that would translate into more features getting added.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
agree, Dave.
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million action right there. Is one of my favorite quotes in the whole world is, the only difference between science and screwing around is writing it down. And so sometimes all it takes is just writing down the feature in the forum as a feature request. And then, people who find use in that can give it a thumbs up. And all of a sudden there's all this, it just takes 1 or 2 people for that traction to build. So yeah, I think leading people to GitHub and making sure to connect people with the proper subject matter experts is a good idea.
I had a couple of examples myself of some of those things where maybe just put something out there and I get absolutely no traction. It's like, I can't believe that people don't have either an opinion on and there were some other topics that were somewhat not controversial, but definitely, ones where you would expect a lot more back and forth. And I didn't get as much. And I'm sure that there's opinions out there. I probably didn't do the best job at finding them. So maybe that's more on me or us to try to make those connections a little bit better. Not offering a solution, just highlighting what I'm seeing.
You're definitely right, Dave. It's something like Nate said, it's the $1 million answer there. Actively trying to noodle on this one, so all input is appreciated. How we can
let this be a plug for the participants who remain in this meeting too. Like if you have any ideas of how we can better connect each other to collaborate on these things or get discussions going, just let us know.
Yeah, thank you.
So just from my point, how I usually try to handle it is, if I know exactly that it's a feature request for a specific part of OpenSearch or basically any other open source product, or it's a bug or whatever, I directly go to GitHub, go to that repository and file the ticket there. If it's something like what I asked before with the whole, hey, how do I actually manage indices? I usually don't do that as a ticket. If there is a forum, I go to the forum and ask it there, because it's quite likely that I just don't know what the solution is and it already exists. So I'd rather ask that in the forum and get answers there. And if the answer there is, hey, actually, we have the same issue and we also don't know what the solution is, then it's the point where we can say, hey, now it's time for a feature request. And then probably we move to GitHub. And there, at least with OpenSearch, a bit of a problem is that there are quite a lot of repositories and there are often requests which might span more than one. So just before the whole migration topic we discussed, we also said, let's raise the ticket in the OpenSearch repository, but it's not something which will be solved in that repository. It will be a standalone product somewhere else, if it's being built at all. So that makes it a bit hard to find the tickets, which is why it's useful if it's already a forum thread, then you post a ticket there and people can follow that link. And it doesn't really matter where it ends up. But if you directly start on GitHub, I'm not subscribed to every single issue and pull request on the OpenSearch repository because there are just too many.
Yeah,
I would just be busy reading all of them all day long.
No,
yeah,
you're right, Ralph, and thank you for highlighting that. Your workflow is exactly what we would anticipate and expect from everyone too. If it's support or how to do something, yeah, that's a forum. But if it's a bug or a direct issue or feature request, that's GitHub. And the breakdown between those two, as you described, is perfect.
If you want to throw a link to the blog I just wrote into the chat, that would be great. It kind of waxes a little bit about when to go to GitHub, when to go to the forums, when to ask for help.
Yeah, Nate wrote a really good overview of that. But like you said, Ralph, there's so many different places to find information about OpenSearch, and that's something we're actively working on to try to simplify for the. Not that we're going to get rid of repos, but how can we bring the right attention to the right areas? And it's
just if I may offer another word at time, but just one last trick that may or may not work is what I usually do is just find one innocent victim for my questions. Because when you ask a question to a broad audience, you may get the crickets. But if you ask someone, that someone is going to have to reply to you. And whether the reply is what you're looking for, or maybe what the next step in the journey is like, well, I don't know, but maybe this person knows. I would default to just have, and I offer myself as a victim if you're looking for one. I know that Ralph has selected me as the victim a couple of times, and I gladly abide. So just pick me or pick anyone else in the project to get started if you're finding that you're not getting traction and stuff. And if we don't know the answer, we'll help you navigate.
Yeah.
At least as a stopgap while we figure out maybe a better strategy overall.
Yeah,
I
don't
was
forget it's your community in here.
I was just going to add, sometimes I had specific questions where I knew I had to get to certain people. I just didn't know who it was. And then it's quite hard to grab those people. And Dave, thanks a lot for that, because I have your email address. So sometimes you just suffer from that.
Yeah, no, just keep doing that. I don't mind it at all.
I actually tried to contact, I think, Nate and Chris at some point about a specific topic, and that didn't work. So then I basically took the route over Dave because I knew he replies to my emails. So that's his mistake.
Yeah, there you go.
And usually, thanks. And I usually, I said, I try to start in the forum, and it's just if I don't get a reply in the forum, then I start to try and use back channels. But I'd actually like to avoid that. I think most or all of those discussions should be out in the open.
We appreciate that.
I
Rob.
agree. Yep.
Tag at Chris on the forum. I think at Nate Boot on the forum, or at David Tippett. There's the three of us that are most active in there. If you don't get traction for a while, and we'll follow up with you and try to pick people's brains. But yeah.
Yeah, please don't be afraid to tag our name or shout out. I put my email in the chat and my GitHub handle in the chat. We'll see if I regret that soon enough, but please do reach out. Because like I said, we don't always know the right answers right away, but we know the people who do. And if there's some contact that someone needs, just like you said, I know someone knows the answer. I just don't know who it is. That's where we can help you. We're professional forum trolls and traffickers of information.
And honestly, every once in a while, there might not be someone that knows the answer, and we'll be honest about that as well.
When that becomes the case, that's the point where you go to the documentation repo and file a feature request for some new docs. Just point of order. Awesome, everybody. Well, my stomach is regretting all the coffee with no food. So if there's no other topics for the good of the order, I think we may as well call it.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for joining, especially our first-time comers.